Nature is a delicately balanced system that has evolved over millennia. It is what makes our Earth so precious and so unique. But that balance is threatened by the impacts of people on wildlife and wildlife habitat around the world. Too often, people destroy wildlife when there are conflicts, leading to declining wildlife populations and the destruction of the ecosystem upon which we all depend. If we maintain this path, iconic species and their unique habitats will disappear forever. But it doesn't have to be this way. In many areas, local communities have emerged to protect native wildlife and encourage peaceful solutions. Some of these, like the Lion Guardians and Wood River Wolf Project, have been widely successful in demonstrating that non-lethal proactive strategies can effectively transform conflicts into sustainable coexistence solutions. In Africa, the Maasai Nation has become guardians of lions they once hunted. Protecting their livestock, the habitat, and providing economic advantages to the whole community. In Australia, communities are racing to save the koala from deforestation and restore their habitat to ensure the survival of this iconic and beloved species. In the western United States, the same ranchers whose ancestors used to trap and poison wolves leading to their eradication are now protecting their livestock in ways that protect wolves too. The number of projects helping to protect wild animals and their habitat is growing. But many of these projects still fail due to lack of resources, expertise, and community support. That's where the International Wildlife Coexistence Network comes in. With a network of interdisciplinary experts across the globe, we are working alongside communities to help them gain the tools and resources needed for people to coexist with wildlife. By working with nature instead of against her, we can heal our planet, adopt sustainable ways to coexist with wildlife, and benefit local communities. The time to act is now. Join us today. Start by making your own wildlife coexistence pledge, and together we can answer the call to protect all life on planet Earth.
For joining us for this special webinar session. We're really excited about folks who have registered and are attending from places all over the globe. So maybe you want to share where you're Zooming from tonight or today or this morning. Certainly our guests are also from all over. And we're just so pleased that you've made time to talk about conservation and creative conservation. My name is Josh Adler, and I'm the Director of Communications for the International Wildlife Coexistence Network. We are here to help communities live more closely and align their relations with nature and the habitats that we share with wildlife. And I'm here on behalf of my colleagues, our wonderful team. Allison is behind the scenes right now. Allison Miller, there she is. She's our manager of operations and special programs. But we also have our founder and executive director, Suzanne Stone, couldn't be here with us this evening, but she's rooting us on from where she is. We also have our director of development, Jessica, and we have Jay Dallas Gudgel, who is our tribal liaison and policy coordinator. So thanks to all of you for all the work you do every day. It's really a pleasure to be part of this team. And it's great to see, yeah, folks on our team have their own supporters and their own fans, as they should. We're here tonight because we're at a time now where we're well aware of what the solutions are to rebalance and restore our world. We know that we need to accelerate rights for Indigenous people. We know that we need to bring rights to nature and habitats. We know that we need to mobilize finances to frontline conservation and restoration projects on the ground. And we know that we need to reform trade systems to sustainable models. And we need to shift toward nature-based and regenerative economies. And coexistence is a part of all of that, recognized in the global biodiversity framework from COP15 last year as target number 4. And coexistence as a target really encapsulates perhaps all the other targets, because it's a balance between socioeconomic boundaries and planetary boundaries. But unfortunately, we're still way off track in addressing the twin crises of climate change and nature loss. And for every tree that we plant or species we introduce, if management for habitat degradation and extinction continues, we won't restore our biosphere. And that's what coexistence is all about, creating a sustainable paradigm for living in right relation with nature. And to coexist, we need to adapt our habits and relations so that they align with living systems and planetary boundaries. So we're hosting this webinar to share creative approaches to reconnecting people and planet. We're going to hear from really exciting startup orgs that have formed just to do that. We're going to explore how their work is helping people value nature, contribute to coexistence outcomes, address gaps in conservation, and provide a vision of a better future for all life. And as we hear from our 3 speakers, please feel free to provide your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, the Q&A box. It's a separate icon at the bottom there. And most of our speakers will be available at the end of their presentations, at the end of all the 3 presentations, to answer any questions. So let me introduce our first speaker from Sovereign Nature Initiative. Seth Bockley is an artist in residence at the Sovereign Nature Initiative and an award-winning and widely produced playwright, fiction writer, and screenwriter. His projects with Sovereign Nature Initiative include Nature Speaks, a literary competition for nature point of view poetry, the Experimental Zone Festival in Amsterdam, and Tracing the Wild, which he's going to speak about, a data art sculpture he created in partnership with Kenya Wildlife Trust for Nairobi Design Week 2023. He is a professor at the University of Chicago, currently teaching a class on performing nature. Thank you so much, Seth.
Thank you, Josh. It's really a pleasure to be here. Hope you can hear me all right. I'm excited to share with folks today a little bit about Sovereign Nature Initiative, a relatively new organization that is doing a lot of exciting and I think kind of groundbreaking work, merging technology and ecology and creativity. As you mentioned, Josh, I'm the artist in residence. I'm going to do a little slideshow here. So let's get that going. I'll speak just for a few minutes about the organization, and then I will talk a little bit more, as you mentioned, about tracing the wild, which coincidentally is also a piece very much rooted in Kenya, and we saw a little bit of in your video intro about the relationships between the Maasai people and predators in that region of the world, and that's also this issue of human wildlife coexistence is really fundamental to the message of the Tracing the Wild project, which I'll get to in just a minute. So here we are, Sovereign Nature Initiative. Who are we? We are an international nonprofit seeking to achieve a thriving planet by reconfiguring nature's value. We're rooted in Lisbon and Amsterdam, but we really are all over the world. We've held hackathons and events that bring together people digitally and remotely. We're founded just a few years ago, and we've already done a lot of work to sort of bring together tech folks, as it were, from around the world who are interested in these topics. We're located at the intersection of ecology, economy, and emerging Web3 technologies. And we aim to flip the economics of ecology by recoding value. What does that mean? We'll get into it a little bit. But fundamentally, the idea is to try to locate value in nature beyond its value for exploitation by humans, to try to understand how nature can express and even own its own value. And so we're looking to transcend the human, non-human dichotomy. Just a small ambition, of course. And so we aim for really human, non-human, or human-nature coexistence. Of course, humans are part of nature, and that's a big part of how we want to change the thinking about this dichotomy. As you can tell, we're thinking big, and so we try to be a big sort of tent to gather folks thinking about these massive issues from a kind of an academic point of view in a kind of think tanky way, but also in a practical way, conservationists and artists. So we have this triangle. It looks a little like the Triforce from The Legend of Zelda, which makes me really happy. And there's art and technology and ecology, these 3 points of the stool, and then creativity, storytelling, and impact economy. We're really interested in using these methods of storytelling and creativity to make sure that our initiatives have real impact, and also speak to the human side of the human nature dichotomy. We want to advocate for nature and a more balanced world between humans and non-humans, and we also want to really respect the work of the folks that do the stewarding of nature and ecology and conservation work. And you'll hear a little bit more about that too. But I'm the art part of the triangle over there, but my colleagues at Sovereign Nature Initiative are very rooted in technology and in theory as well. So we really get into all 3 parts of that triangle. Okay, so DEEP. What is DEEP? DEEP is our big initiative this year in 2023. It's the Decentralized Ecological Economics Protocol. And so this is a system that turns dynamic wildlife data into actionable digital assets that fund and sustain conservation efforts around the globe. So we've been saying it's a game-changing proposition. We're decentralizing this process for conservation. Game-changing is a little bit of an intentional allusion to the fact that a lot of the digital assets we've been creating using eco data are actually being applied by artists for application in online gaming and sort of the video game industry, where we find there's a lot of interest in tapping into data from nature to actually represent nature in gaming worlds. It's a corner of the digital landscape that we've just been learning how much actually eagerness there is for folks that are, for example, getting into buying a new avatar for their character in a game to actually have artwork inside of a gaming world that reflects elements of nature. So you'll hear about that as well in a moment. But we're really looking to, with this DEEP protocol, to look at data in a new way. We live in a world awash in data and nature data from so many places. But our question is, how do we translate that into actual money that will support conservation efforts? So we're looking for artwork and storytelling and digital asset, a sort of expression of data that can be that can actually bring benefit and value back to nature itself and to those who steward nature. So the process looks like this. We have at the top, we've got this protocol. We've got this these data sets, these really rich data sets that we're getting from a number of conservation organizations that have come forward and are working with us as part of this deep kind of network. We process the eco data, make it actionable, reduce it to something that artists can work with. So over on the lower right, you see the asset creators, maybe creating digital artwork or an avatar or some environment online. And then down below, these products can be sold with revenue distributed to ecological stewards, who are then rewarded for their data gathering that they're already often doing for scientific purposes, or as part of their ecological initiatives and conservation initiatives, tracking, for example, lions or other animals out in the wild, elephants, etc. And then they provide that eco data back to DEEP as a living data set and a dynamic data set. We're looking for dynamic data all the time, and that just reinforces itself. So we see this as a sort of a virtuous cycle. We have a number of partners right now at Sovereign Nature Initiative, and it's growing every month. These 10 organizations are in Africa, Europe, North America. And I'll just highlight one over on the upper left here. You see Kenya Wildlife Trust. They were our partner for the project that I'll describe, the art project called Tracing the Wild. They're a really bold and forward-thinking conservation organization in Kenya that works in the Mara region. It's called the Masai Mara region of Kenya, tracking predators, and the famous ones: lions, cheetahs, hyenas, wild dogs, leopards. They're looking at these famous animals, these apex predators, and trying to understand both their vulnerability to human-wildlife conflict in particular, and just basically the health of these animals. And they're really trying to consider the lions in particular, and some of these predators as a trust that's owned really by Kenyans, that there's a sort of public investment in these animals that they believe really need to be held in a healthy, in perpetuity for all time, as both a point of pride, no pun intended, for Kenyans and for this part of Africa, but that the health of these animals is something that we should hold sort of in trust. So they're a really cool organization that we partnered with for some of these projects. So this year we've generated over $100,000 for these ecological stewards, including Kenya Wildlife Trust, to pat ourselves on the back a little bit. And in March, these first two projects, those both benefited Kenya Wildlife Trust. These were projects Tracing the Wild, a data story sculpture, and that's the project I initiated, and I'll talk about in the second half of this little chat. And then at the same time, we launched a dynamic digital collectible set using the same data, using the basically collar data from lions living in the Masai Mara region. Created these digital collectibles that entered the sort of the Munsama ecosystem, an online gaming environment in which the sort of avatars created by the data sets ended up selling and making a fair amount of money that went back immediately into the hands of the conservation organization Kenya Wildlife Trust that supplied that data. And then finally, in September recently, we had an event ticketing collectible with an event called Polka Dot Sub-Zero that was a collaboration with a marine conservation organization based in Portugal, also raised money for that organization. Again, Wild Sama, the second piece, the second project that I listed before, this is an example of one of the avatars that was generated by their designers. This is not, these are not our designs. We really consider ourselves a kind of conduit at Sovereign Nature Initiative for, again, the data to go to the designers to then do what their users, or in this case, gamers, are looking for with the data. It's also telling the story of the data in a way that respects and sort of honors the source of the data, but that also transforms it into kind of an actionable collectible that will appeal to their community. And so we generated over $75,000 for Kenya Wildlife Trust through that launch back in March. Polka Dot Sub-Zero, this event ticketing, essentially a collectible artwork, an NFT that was made available when people were buying tickets to this event, generated $11,000 for AIM, which again supports the health of marine life, dolphins, etc., in and around Portugal. The sea adjacent to Portugal. And so here's an example of how these assets are sort of, there's a little bit of just a tiny bit of the back end so that you understand sort of how we see ourselves as again a kind of a conduit for this data. This group AIM, AIMM, is tracking dolphins, is tracking whales, and artists are basically transforming that data into these really appealing and interesting animations, and also into data sets that can be understood and interpreted by individuals who feel like they're sort of able to, buy into this project by, when they buy a ticket, they're randomly assigned, let's say, a particular marine animal, and then they're learning about it while they're also receiving this sort of token. And then that token in turn holds value. And our whole idea is that value then is returned immediately back to the conservation organization. So Tracing the Wild, again, the project that I was involved with and led as the creative director, that launched at Nairobi Design Week, as Josh mentioned, is a data story sculpture. Well, what is that? It means that we took the data, again, from lions in the Masai Mara who are being tracked via collars. And we transformed their data set. So in other words, tracking literally lions as they moved around, and made them into sculptures of various kinds. We wanted to show how many kinds of artwork could be made with the same data set. So here, actually on the right, this little animation, it was created by Daria Smaktina, one of our core artists on Tracing the Wild. Naramat, you'll see that word at the bottom, is the name of a lioness, a female lion. Date of birth, July 2014. Also, strangely, the month that my daughter was born. I didn't even know that before. Okay, next. Oh yeah, here we go. So Tracing the Wild also had a physical manifestation. And our idea with Tracing the Wild was to, again, see what we could do with this data, these data sets of collars from lions moving around. And what we learned is that we could apply this both digitally and physically, and that actually those things complemented each other. Our goal was to sell the digital assets, because that's a lot of where our work lives, digital art expression. But I was very passionate. I come from a theater background and from a sort of in-person installation art background. And so I wanted to bring that as well, to really bring it to life for people. So at Nairobi Design Week, we had this monumental physical installation artwork that also had a digital corollary. And we debuted it at Nairobi Design Week earlier this year, and the physical piece that you see in front of you is made by Chuma Anagbado, a really incredible digital and physical artist who carved these panels, and then Lisbon-based artist Daria Smaktina, who made that earlier animation you saw, again using the same data sets. And so that when you look at the panel in front of in the image here, those brown lines below the portrait of the lion are actually her movements over the course of several months, and you can sort of see, if you look closely at the artwork, that she got close to the borders of the Masai Mara reservation area, and close to human settlement. So it really the data tells a story about human-wildlife conflict. The project centers on these three large hardwood etched portraits of individual lions. They are real lionesses in the wild named Mama Kali, Naramat, and Sintame. There's also a QR code on the artwork that actually linked to those 3D digital sculptures. And it was accompanied by sound by a local artist named Mercy Barno, who mixed rhythms from the Mara region with sounds of wildlife to create an immersive experience. There's also an educational component. We had rangers from Kenya Wildlife Trust on site at Nairobi Design Week talking about their work and how they got the data. They also interacted with the artwork, and were really surprised to see that their work, tracking lions, had become this sculpture. Chuma said, "The data lines were a natural fit with my art, which reimagines a cultural past, leverages modern technology, and projects it into a digitized future. I've always wanted to include conservation in my work." Chuma is an amazing artist. He doesn't often work with nature-based or ecological-based projects. He does these amazing portraits of humans. But I was really grateful that he jumped into this project and did these very affectionate and empathic portraits of the lions themselves and their faces. There's such a warmth to the empathy of his work. And then we built it on Deep. Again, this is that protocol that I mentioned at the beginning of this chat. We want to make dynamic art that reflects eco data. Of course, the physical pieces aren't going to be transformed all the time, those woodcuts that you saw, but digital art can be dynamic and reflect changes quickly. So we wanted to create a vocabulary of digital art to represent the movement of these lions that was also beautiful and sculptural. And so these same data points that were used in that portrait of Naramat were also used to create a 3D sculpture by Daria. And those 3D sculptures, you saw the animation at the beginning of the talk, are actually featured right now at a festival in Venice, Contemporary Venice 12th edition. Daria's 3D sculptures are being featured there. So we had the physical piece and the digital piece side by side, showing the different ways data points can be used to make art. And the project attracted significant press. We had a lot of coverage in Nairobi that really raised awareness of the work of the rangers. You see that fellow at the top right there is one of the rangers who goes out and collects the data, works putting the collars on lions, tranquilizing them, putting the collars on, tracking where they are, and again, really inviting awareness of the scientists and rangers and other folks in the conservation space whose work is appreciated in Kenya and known, but not always so intimately, and really putting a human face as well as a lion face to the work that's happening up in the Mara. And the goal is coexistence. The goal is balance between humans and wildlife in this part of the world, to mitigate human-wildlife conflict by tracking lions where they are, seeing where conflict might be happening, and trying to avoid it, and trying to really understand how a healthy ecosystem could be built that could incorporate these predators as well as human communities that graze cattle in this region and that want to live side by side. So in the end, Tracing the Wild raised thousands of dollars through the sale of digital and physical art. And we proved that these sort of art derivatives can connect eco data directly to conservation stewards. Again, it had educational value to let people know about the work of Kenya Wildlife Trust. And I'm happy to answer more questions about sort of exactly how we envision that cycle of translating eco data into art and then back to value for conservation organizations. But I'll just conclude by saying sort of my mission or mantra for this project, which was: nature expresses itself through data. Art translates this data to human empathy, empowering nature to hold its own value. That's a little bit about Tracing the Wild and Sovereign Nature Initiative. Thanks for listening. And you can get in touch with me here, Seth at sovereignnature.com. And I know we'll take questions later, but I think I'll just wrap up there.
Perfect. Wonderful, Seth. So exciting how you're combining art, technology, and ecology. And we're going to keep going in that direction now, towards another organization who's truly building an immersive experience that brings people both into nature and brings nature online. From Guardians of Earth, we're going to hear from David Haynes, who is co-founder and chief bard, with a focus on team culture and communications, having graduated in science communication at the Australian National University. David is the first to admit that as a product of mainstream culture growing up, he didn't feel deeply in relation to nature. However, after meeting his co-founders and experiencing firsthand the potential of gamified nature tech to help reframe one's place in nature, he was inspired to see others empowered in the same way that he made a career switch from the public service. He's a father of 2 young sons and has recently joined his neighborhood's land care group, regenerating a critically endangered ecosystem in their urban park. And he's also been so kind as to join us where it's very early in Australia, and he's been scavenging for caffeine. So he should be all powered up now. David?
I'm well powered up now, and it's 9:30, so it's not too bad where I am. But really appreciate the opportunity to join this conversation. So thank you, Josh, and the team there, and thank you, Seth, for sharing your stories as well. I appreciate, Josh, you leading in with a little bit of an insight into my own personal story, and I want to humbly put that into perspective. That the beauty of the natural world obviously consists of a tapestry of diversity, and that's just one small story. I want to make sure that I share a few more stories here, because it's not just about me, it's about Guardians of Earth, it's about the global community. So one other key story, Malika Robinson, a co-founder of Guardians of Earth, who really wanted to be here today, she asked me to share a little bit of her story as well. So she was raised in South India, and she experienced firsthand the impact on biodiversity in GDP poor but resource-rich locations, and the disproportionate impact that has on women in particular. And that has inspired her, and from that experience, she believes that we need to have solutions for the crises that we face that are grounded in economics, but also go hand in hand with awareness raising so we can reach the mainstream. She also, from that experience, has developed a sense that we can't continue in cutthroat Web 2 competition, but that we really do need to lean into epic collaboration through Web 3 visions, where we recognize that we are purpose-driven and that we, in a decentralized fashion, are rewarding those making impact on the ground. So just grounding where I'm coming from a couple of personal stories, but recognizing there's so many stories that need to be empowered if we are to succeed in this space. And bringing it into context that, you know, there are stories that need to be celebrated that go back into deep time. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners or traditional custodians of the land that I'm joining this meeting from, the Ngunnawal people, respect their elders, past, present, and future, and also extend that respect to anyone who's joining the meeting who is in custodial relationship with land, and draw inspiration from that in the work that we do. So what is Guardians of Earth? Why am I talking about stories here? So our mission at Guardians of Earth is all about connecting people to nature through gamified tech. And when we think about being a tech startup that's thinking about, well, deeply driven by helping with biodiversity crisis, there's different ways we could tackle it. And obviously one path we could go is helping to collect as much data as possible. And that's, you know, that is a noble path. There are large data gaps in regards to our understanding of the natural world. But our take on that is that, well, yes, there's so much more we can learn, and that's important, and that we can help projects on the ground with specific contexts. But at the same time, there is a huge data gap, and that's the human side of it. And solving the problem isn't just about the data. Obviously, there's the relationship with nature that needs to be dealt with as well. And I can't frame that any better, obviously, than Robin Wall-Kimmerer in Braiding Sweetgrass. It's not just the land that is broken, but it's our relationship with land. So if we focus simply on collecting the data, but don't think about what relationship that data is serving, we don't want to get to a point where we're just more efficiently getting data so that we can better extract from nature. We want to make sure that we're connecting at the mainstream level, because if we want to impact relationship with nature, we need to reach society at large, and we need to reframe our thinking. So that's a little bit of grounding of why we're coming at it with this creative solution with a sort of mainstream approach to gaming, but with a focus on stories. So there's 4 key ways with Guardians of Earth that we fundamentally think about how stories help us do what we do and actually have an impact here. So the first thing that we're doing with stories is using them to engage new audiences. Stories have immense power. If we're thinking about relationship in society, if we want to have a real impact there, then we need to reach people who are perhaps not currently in a healthy relationship with nature, who might be distracted by their phones. And to be honest, that is a large proportion of mainstream society is taken in by technology that isn't always designed with positive intent. So what we're about is using stories in gamified worlds to create hooks of interest, to go, okay, well, there's something magical here to explore. And it's only once we can engage new audiences, then we have the opportunity through our designs to reframe relationship with nature. So with Guardians of Earth, we've been on an iterative journey, and our first game was called Quest a Game, but it's certainly not mainstream. We're building towards Guardians of Earth game itself to be a really mainstream phenomenon. But through our games, the design is all about having real world exploration. So the game itself gives players a mission to become an explorer, to get out into the real world and use augmented reality to create this interaction between the real and the digital. And players are given the opportunity or the quest to take photos and videos of the different species they encounter in the wild. So they're helping to map that biodiversity, and they're given roles to help identify what they're finding or help identify what other players are finding. And then ultimately, we're now building into the space of collecting deeper knowledge. So if they're also able to share stories about what they're finding. So by giving players a very participatory way of realizing that they're a part of nature, they are in relation to nature, and that they are actively part of real biodiversity solutions because the information that's collected supports global biodiversity research databases, it helps reframe people's personal stories. And they start to realize that they can even dive deeper, but only once they've been engaged and only once they've been given this participatory experience. But once we're engaging people, once we're helping reframe their personal stories, we then have the ability to celebrate what's happening on the ground. So it could be these new audiences that have been engaged, starting to engage more deeply with nature, or it could be existing projects where there's already fantastic regeneration work happening on the ground, all around the globe, and then having celebration of what's happening there, reaching these new audiences in context where they're more open to receive those stories. But the fourth way that we're using stories, and I think this is the most important, probably the most creative element for us and the most impactful in the long term, is that we want to use stories to help humanity rethink what types of nature data actually can have value. So yes, it's super important that we are out collecting as much hard data, mapping species, putting the right Latin binomials on these species, thinking about which ones are endangered, what pressures are happening where. This is super important. And of course, this is a part of our solution. We are empowering people to get out and get involved in this data collection. But we realize that, you know, if in the context that, you know, within global biodiversity framework and intentions to collect more and more data to inform real projects on the ground, if we're not taking in socio-ecological context, which varies, of course, in different cultures and different circumstances, by making sure that people are at the center of those processes of data collection, of data confrontation, ground truthing, to make sure the data we're collecting is honoring the relationships that exist and the relationships that we want to create, then we're really missing the mark. So what we are building with our platform, making sure that we can mainstream engagement, bring people into this context, is the ability to empower people to be sharing stories of, you know, diverse stories, different forms of knowledge, whether it's personal encounters, people who are new to nature, encountering different species, sharing their celebration of those moments, projects that are regenerating, sharing their milestones. It could be students coming together in projects, creating cultural significance for species that they're celebrating at their school. It could be mythologies, all sorts of ways that we can spark reconnection with nature. So that's a really important piece for us. So now bringing how we are using these stories into the context of the Guardians of Earth platform, I like to think about it now as having three layers. So there's our engagement layer, which is where we're bringing in engagement from the community, which includes knowledge. So we're calling it engagement and knowledge. On the other end, in order to help understand what the community is finding and give them appropriate rewards, we have a verification and rewards layer. And then a really important piece that has come together much more lately is our land and partnerships. So I'll just expand a little bit on each of these. That's just a little bit of an example of some of the AR in our games, showing real world sightings that have come in from the community as people are exploring. So that one's in Vietnam. So with our engagement and knowledge layer, this is about having our games and creating it in a very mainstream way and offering empowering adventures. This is a way that we can hook new audiences and then bring them into that participatory experience where they're submitting sightings, identifications, and stories. We need to do this in a way where it's mainstream, and we're iterating towards that. I think we've taken great inspiration on our whole journey from Pokemon Go, for instance. It was such a huge socio-technological phenomenon. It's hard to think of many that have been so impactful on demonstrating at scale globally how diverse populations can be incentivized to get out and explore the real world. The gaming mechanics that we have designed when merged with that idea of having a digital mirror of the real world and getting people into exciting game roles where they explore, they add their own biodiversity knowledge as they're exploring that world. The potential is really, really exciting. So, but this all began, so we're building towards Guardians of Earth game. It all began with our first iteration called Quest a Game, and all the core mechanics that I've been talking about, that's all in there, and that exists now, and anyone can jump in and have some fun. And that received a fantastic testimonial from Jane Goodall herself, saying that the potential for that to reconnect people with nature was fantastic. So from our gaming layer, obviously I mentioned, it's all about finding and contributing, mapping knowledge about different species that you're finding in the real world. So we have a blind peer-reviewed, decentralized expertise system that has the human at the center that helps to confirm and verify that data. And then as players are sharing their knowledge, there's a reward system, which is using our internal currency biocoin that's transparently distributed to the community. And we're building this out towards a Web3 vision. So we're taking some careful steps in that direction. And then these layers together, I think a really important piece is then this now gives us the ability for any location in the world to create what we call our nature realm. So it's a digital twin of all the biodiversity community mapping that's occurred. So it includes community mapping coming through our platform, but also data partners. And interpreting that data, that gives us the ability to give what we call a bioscore, which is an indication of biodiversity health, taking into account the community monitoring aspect and the ability to see change over time. And what we're just starting to do now is thinking about how stories can be incorporated into that model as well. So these digital nature realms can showcase the biodiversity as mapped by the community, celebrate the stories that are coming in from community, and getting that in front of ultimately the mainstream audiences that come into the game as that's released and taken to the broader world. And we build a business model around this. So obviously there's different opportunities we can explore where businesses want to be investing in showcasing the biodiversity of their area, the projects, sustainable projects they're putting in, and the efforts of their community in an experiential way, so their stories can get out there. And ultimately, the concept here is that these realms have treasuries because there's a business model around it, which enables that value to then be redistributed in a decentralized way to those doing the work on the ground, the community doing the mapping and sharing the stories and demonstrating the impact. So just a few quick examples. Obviously, ecotourism is a space where that celebration of place and community and biodiversity is really core, where we can continue to build that business model around it to return value to our communities. Another really exciting project we're looking at the moment is a permaculture, refugee-led permaculture program on the ground in Uganda. So we're just building a campaign about that we'll be launching very soon. And I think hopefully I've given enough thread there that there's some creative opportunities for outreach to get the stories of international wildlife coexistence out in a participatory way to mainstream audiences. And I'd love to not over-engineer anything in that space, but very much listen. So if people have ideas, Josh and the team, we want to talk more after this, I'd love to hear it. And obviously, as an aside, fantastic alignment with what you put forth, Seth. I'd love to explore some opportunities there as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, likewise, David. Would love to talk more after this.
Yeah, loving how these organizations are really building in different spaces that are making wildlife visible. And also, I love how Guardians of Earth is making wildlife accessible. This is something that you can do in your backyard. You can start from wherever you are, but also connects globally. And so really, really exciting. Our last presentation will be from a group I've been following for a while and is actually a finalist in the X Prize that's coming up for their ability to monitor rainforests. Gainforest will be represented by Simeon Max, who holds a Master of Science in Forestry and Wood Science from both TU Munich and Yale. And he brings a wealth of international experience, having been involved in implementing large-scale forest conservation programs integrated in local communities, livelihoods for sustainable rural development in 10 distinct countries. A regular participant at UN climate conferences, Simeon is deeply committed to global sustainability and environmental initiatives. His enthusiasm is fueled by the potential of leveraging technology for the betterment of nature, biodiversity, and climate and human coexistence.
Good morning, evening, or afternoon, everyone. Today, I'd like to introduce you to our revolutionary concept that merges. Good morning, evening, or afternoon, everyone. Today, I'd like to introduce you to our revolutionary concept that merges technology and community power to fight deforestation and conserve nature. We call it Measure to Earn by Gainforest. My name is Simeon Max. Our mission is straightforward but ambitious: to halt global deforestation by giving the tools and financial incentives directly to local communities. Because, as we know, the best caretakers of forests and ecosystems are often the people who live beside or inside them. When working towards averting a climate catastrophe and restoring biodiversity, we are wondering, where's the place for humans? How do we fit into this beautiful globe here? We think that technology helps humans to reconnect to nature and find a way for peaceful coexistence with other species. So far, Gainforest has successfully collaborated with over 24 communities across the global south. We have now partners on every continent, so for example in Kenya and Uganda, or in Indonesia and the Philippines, to name just a few. We're mapping these organizations on the globe so they get a space to show their work transparently, to show the world what impact they're having on the ground. Let's take one step back. This map here is a depiction of where biodiversity data has globally already been collected. And the saying goes, what we do not measure often gets ignored, or vice versa. What gets measured gets properly managed. So here in yellow, red, you can see where there is a lot of data available. North America, Europe, and in the biodiversity hotspots actually, where most protection and sustainable management is required, in the green spots, and that is the global south, the tropical belt around the world, is where data is only scarcely available. And we want to change this. There is approximately $25 billion in public funds set aside for results-based payments in forests. But due to issues like overlapping land claims and slow performance measurement, this money often never, or only small shares, reach the communities that need it most. Thankfully, we live in an age where technology can help solve these challenges. So we do have the technology already, from field-based to drone-based, even satellite-based monitoring. The tools are at our disposal. And Gainforest has started deploying them with our partner organizations. And at the same time, we are developing artificial intelligence tools to automate the interpretation of the data. I want to give you some insights into what these data collection tools look like. One of the apps that we have handed out is called ODK Collect. This is a screenshot of the backend where you can see that the data is coming in from all of these places all over the world. It's very user-friendly, works offline, and it's easy to modify what data you can collect with it. We use machine learning for example, allometric tree biomass estimation. So this helps us better understand and quantify forest biomass, which is critical for carbon storage assessment, but also biodiversity estimates. We do a drone-based tree counting. So they're kind of our eyes in the sky. We use drone imagery to count trees, estimate biomass, or even to detect species. So that also works from normal photos. And here in the left, you might remember the little video from above. It's a video from Kenya, and we have applied machine learning to detect the species there. And if I'm going a little bit back and forth, you can see the AI detects the trees versus the elephants and can even label it with the species information. Even environmental DNA or eDNA can be gathered via drones. It serves as a genetic snapshot of biodiversity in a given area, offering yet another layer of critical data. With drones, you can also deploy audio sensors, so to record the bioacoustics of an ecosystem and measure the biodiversity from this data as well. We have trialed eDNA sampling for the recent semifinals of the Rainforest X Prize competition, and we have now made it to the finals which is quite exciting. And later on in this presentation, I will give you some insights on how even you can collaborate on the X-Prize finals that will happen in a year in July in the Amazon. But now I want to get a little bit more concrete on Measure to Earn and take you to the Philippines and tell you more about how our pioneering case study there went. Local communities have implemented Measure to Earn to protect their mangrove forests. Here are the two forests as seen from the satellite. This not only helps the environment, but also provides them with sustainable income. So you can see the two villages on these slides and the nearby mangrove forests, and obviously villages are aware of the benefits of mangroves for fishing grounds or for tsunami protection, for example. And so we went there and we partnered with a amazing local organization called Oceanus, led by Camille, and we taught the villagers how to identify the different mangrove species and how to measure them, for example, how to measure the diameters. And this was a very collaborative process together with a corporate donor, and talking to these communities is just such a grounding experience. And we went into these forests and had like little competitions between the measuring groups, or like challenges, how many trees they can measure in a certain amount of time. We also planted some mangroves in between, so to fill in the open gaps where currently no trees are growing. And you can see from these shots that it's really not the most accessible ecosystem. So when the tide is high, you cannot even enter the areas. I mentioned before that collecting of the data works offline, but then uploading, you have to go to a place where you have an internet connection. This is what happened here. And then we did some on-the-ground reviews on the validity of the data in this case, but we will automate this process of verifying the data. And we immediately paid everyone based on how many measurements they have made. So we have a crypto-based solution to make immediate money transfers, but in some cases we also paid out the cash. So within just 3 days, we were able to engage 40 community members. We measured 300 large grown mangrove trees and planted and measured another 400 smaller mangrove trees. We collected 450 drone images on these sites and paid out $400 in rewards. So let's see if this video plays. I want to show you where the data eventually goes. So this is our online map where we are providing a public place for all of these projects. And this map is live synced with the trees that they are photographing on the ground, as well as the photos, the measurements. And so this is how we want to create 100% transparency of the activities that are happening on the ground. So the trees get published here, the drone imagery gets published here, camera trap footage can be uploaded through this platform. So it's really telling the story about the community work, about the local biodiversity and how that fits together. I have mentioned before the Rainforest X Prize, where the finals will happen next year, and we're competing together with the ETH BiodiffX team to measure biodiversity and create insights from the Amazon forest. And we're currently looking for collaborators, people to work with. We have allocated $50,000 for Measure to Earn and Label to Earn. So we want to gather drone images, photos from the Amazon forest that we would then label, so identify the species from that data, and then train the artificial intelligence models from that information. So if you're interested in participating in collecting that data or helping identify the species, please do reach out to me and I'd be happy to engage with you. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be available for any questions. So please shoot us a message on Instagram, Twitter, or via email. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Simeon. And unfortunately, he couldn't be here with us live because he's hopefully asleep. But really wonderful to hear about what Gainforest is accomplishing. Their measure to earn programs are really a big deal in terms of being able to provide resources to frontlines communities, indigenous peoples, so that they can steward ecosystems, which they do best. So I want to go ahead and say thanks. My daughter's enjoying this and finding me funny. That's really something to celebrate. But also thanks to our panelists for their awesome presentations and all the work that they're doing. Now's your opportunity, which I see someone is starting, to ask questions in our Q&A. So we'll bring David and Seth back here to give your best responses. We've got a three-parter from Daniel Ramp. I'm very glad to see you here with us, Daniel. We'll do our best. Daniel's asking, do you have evidence that your gaming system creates real-world transformation outside of the game experience? So let's start with that, David. And I think, Seth, this is probably something for you to talk to as well, since SNI is also working in gaming.
Yeah, absolutely. So the biodiversity mapping information that's collected through Questi game, our existing game, is ultimately shared with the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF. So we're very transparent in regards to all of the species observations. And we have a transparent, we call it the Oracle of Life, our verification system. So we have the submissions from people exploring the real world, and then the identifications coming in from the collective community as well. So in terms of one piece of real world transformation, we have the collection of the real data informing real research and conservation efforts on open biodiversity databases. So we see those cited in research publications. And in regards to how that then flows through to real world transformation for the individuals being involved in their relationship with nature, we do have lots of examples where having that ability to be recognized in real world research. I think he was 12 years old at the time when there was a kid who had submitted a photo. I think it was a pygmy grasshopper or something in that vein. I can't remember the particular species, but he was cited as a co-author on a scientific paper describing that species. So the power that it has to support global research, but then reframe those messages as actually being a part of that is really powerful. I hope that goes far enough to answer that first question.
Yeah.
I'll just make a general observation, which is actually addressing both maybe the first and the second question that Daniel asked, which was how do you remove the narcissistic tendencies of gaming, which promotes personal growth? My answer is that our work within the gaming world is really meeting gamers where they are, which is often, yes, in front of their computers and engaged in a quite solitary practice. I think that there's a kind of radical meeting of worlds that's represented by these initiatives, wherein folks that, yes, are tethered in some cases to their devices, or actually spending quite a lot of their lives in metaverses and alternate worlds and digital worlds, are also fascinated, rather ironically or paradoxically, by the prospect that what they're seeing and encountering in the gaming world is linked to the real world. That first question of real world transformation is actually precisely the interest of, I think, the gamers that want to invest in these kinds of eco-data based derivative artworks or products or tokens or avatars. They're fascinated by the idea. There's a real lion in Kenya that is informing what's happening in the game. So in some ways, I think we're meeting gamers where they are and asking them to, yes, harness their own interest in this quite individuated pursuit of accomplishment within their world, and yes, asking them to consider how that might actually affect something in the real world, and by implication, I think encouraging folks around the world who are all wired together, as we all are, and spend part of our times in front of computers and part of our times outdoors, to consider ourselves, part of a global ecosystem, and part of the solution to ecological problems. We don't necessarily think of ourselves as, missionaries saying, okay, turn off your computers and go outside and go tend to nature around you. But there is an implicit ethic here, that's saying, what you're seeing on the screen, has real world value, has real world implications, and we know that gamers and people interested in gaming are capable of kind of holding both of those truths at once, that they want to be sort of in the game, and then they also want to know that it's having real world impact.
Yeah, David, looks like you have more to add.
Oh, just picking up that thread on the second question there, around narcissism. I feel that, to one extent, as Seth mentioned, we're meeting gamers and society where they are, and in one sense, it's important for us to not frame and continue this a cultural trope that, okay, you are the hero, you are over nature, you need to save it because it's in trouble, come in, hero, but recognize that there are nuances to bringing them in a narrative that gives them a sense of being able to develop personally, but framing that in a sense of in relationship and in community. And I think that's something that we're developing towards with our nature realms model. So yeah, I mean, gamers, that's what a large part of motivation for certain game mechanics is, there is leveling up, there is personal growth, but how do we tap into that in a way that nudges that development to be targeted into, okay, actually, I didn't used to be able to identify species, but now I can identify a lot, and I can do that in context that helps these communities over here and these communities over here. So doing it in relation as opposed to just doing it in your own personal channel, if that makes sense.
As well as, in order even just to engage with what you're doing, David, people have to go outside. They have to go out into their environments and explore it. So there's a proactive aspect built in there.
Yeah, the personal growth doesn't happen in isolation. It only happens in relation. That's right.
Yeah. I'll also push back a little bit in terms of the notion of the solitary gamer. As not a gamer myself, but someone who's friend of gamers, this is a place where they actually connect and find a lot of community, from my understanding. So there's a lot of kind of socializing and network building around modern gaming.
Yeah. I was just oh, sorry to interrupt you, Josh. I was just going to add one more thing, which is, there's there is a way in which, traveling out to the most remote parts of the world to look at, mangroves or lions or some other species that might exist in a kind of what you might call a kind of deep wilderness, or even a highly protected area, can be something of a luxury, and it is just economically the case that it takes a lot of resources, even carbon resources, for humans to travel and be tourists of nature, or be out, in the most remote wilderness. And I think that the idea of coexistence with this many billions of humans on this planet will require a lot of creativity in terms of how different people are engaged in different ways with nature. Not everybody's going to go be a direct nature steward of a cheetah or a mangrove. And the question also is then, how are people engaged as a community? Let's say that they are in an urban environment, and creating community that is aware of ecological impact. That's maybe not something that they could walk out their door and see, but that's an important part of the puzzle. And feeling even that sense of national. I mentioned also the sort of sense of national pride in wilderness. I think we have that in the United States, the sense of our national parks being these jewels of our country, and not, maybe we go on a once in a lifetime trip to these places and see them for ourselves, but maybe the rest of our time, when we're going to our day-to-day work, if we're urban people, we're not going to Yellowstone National Park, 3 times a year, but we're aware of it. And what are the ways that we engage with these sort of natural spaces that we want to coexist with and be proud of and be in relationship to, that don't require us to physically go there? And in part, these digital solutions are in some measure a way to address that as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear you offering those critiques of what it means to connect with nature. Certainly, we want to offer people a way to do that remotely so that they can value species or habitats that maybe they're not directly connected to, that maybe they'll never visit, but want to see flourish and thrive and not be degraded. As well as, I think there's fair reason to be critical of kind of the jet setting tendencies of a lot of people traveling to conferences, which is not to deny that meeting in person is the best and the deepest way to engage. However, even just being able to do this webinar remotely where we're not burning fossil fuels to do it in the same way is an important option to build on, especially as you're saying, with the habits of the billions of people that we're working with to kind of create this new sustainable world. And just to speak to Daniel's last question about what is the urban social culture and people you're trying to change, most impact on biodiversity occurs outside where the populace lives. What's interesting is actually Suzanne was just talking the other day about a book she was reading about the potential, the kind of latent potential of restoring urban ecosystems as connected habitats as well, where of course there's so much focus, rightly so, that there are these conservation imperatives around biodiversity hotspots, and they must be protected as soon as possible completely. But also everyone lives in wildlife habitat. Everyone lives in ecosystems that have the potential to be restored.
If I might, Josh, just because it leads to a particular thread in the outside of my Guardians of Earth hat, the work that I'm actually doing across the road here in an urban park, where we've got just recently one of the neighbourhood ecologists identified a critically endangered ecosystem recognised by the local government. So we've got some land care and a special area that we're trying to regenerate here. And I guess it ties into Daniel's question as well around, a lot of the impact is elsewhere, but I think the drivers that cause that impact come from mainstream society, our expectations of how our markets need to work. And we see our gaming opportunities as reaching people to ultimately shift the paradigm and change the culture, because just trying to do on the ground regeneration work in a park with community, it's surprising some of the negative perceptions from the local community, who have the sense of, okay, nature is elsewhere. This is our local park. We use it for, X and Y. You're doing something. You want to protect nature. You go elsewhere and do that. I'm worried about snakes. You're trying to put in more gum trees. Oh well, gum trees don't live in the suburbs. These are the kinds of deeply seated cultural tropes that exist that I guess, when I think of coexistence, you often think of wolves or lions, but gum trees are seen by certain people as they have no right to be here because humans are living here and they might fall and hurt our car or hurt our tree or hurt our house. It's that kind of sentiment that I think if we don't really attack at a mainstream level will persist, and people will just not see nature having a role. So yes, obviously, it's hard. There are special methods we would need to apply where gamers are thinner on the ground in agricultural land or in remote environments, but there would be different methods for onboarding communities and making sure incentives flow to them for their impact. But yeah, a larger piece is changing the culture of the gamers and broader society. So when my kids grow up, they don't feel that the gum trees don't exist where they've lived for millions of years. I think it's just such a toxic aspect of our society.
I just want to chime in really quickly about speaking of kids. I think that young people have a lot of good ideas about how to live with and alongside nature. We've been really impressed, and I mentioned we ran a few hackathons, and we had one based out of Kenya that attracted a number of East African teams of young coders and programmers, and our earlier hackathon had to do actually with parks in Amsterdam and the question of what to do with some bioremediation that was taking place in a polluted site in a particular area of Amsterdam. And in both of these cases, we had a lot of young teams really looking at, biodiversity and ecological restoration, not in terms of these grand national parks and things, but really things right in their backyard. We had in the Amsterdam case a group creating an app for helping insects to mate, a kind of Tinder for bugs, and really thinking about how to observe insects happen that are in their local parks and what's going on with them. And a little bit of that Pokemon Go thing that you mentioned, David, that gamification of everyday life, where we're asking people to look up from their phones and look at nature, but also to use their phones to look at nature, and in a really playful way, and to actually awaken the self to the world around us. So I also think that I believe that a lot of the solutions for how to be more aware of nature and coexistence with nature can go hand in hand with this technology development. And I just want to add one more thing, which is, these highly urban environments, yes, nature is all around us, exactly as you said, Josh. And the question of restoration is a really interesting one, meaning that there's a tendency, I think, in ecology thinking to sort of think, well, let's go back to how it was. In the case of this Dutch polluted site, we're remediating the soil, right? So there's grasses that are being planted to remediate this soil, and that's wonderful. But like restoring the Netherlands, to what? It's like that's been a terraformed, completely human dominated landscape, the entirety of the nation of the Netherlands for so many centuries. And so these questions of rewilding, again, this are beyond the scope of, I think, tonight's conversation, but I really think it's interesting and provocative to imagine what would an urban balance with humans and nature look like? Would there be gum trees? Would there be species that are sort of native species, which is a big trend right now, and definitely in North America, reintroducing native species to, for example, I'm actually in St. Paul, Minnesota right now, and there's huge efforts to bring back local prairie plants, and a lot of interest in that kind of thinking. And will the next generation carry forward that idea of restoration? And how will restoration be tailored to individual, maybe urban environments where people want to live more with nature? What will they bring back, so to speak, and how to find the right balance?
Yeah, these are really wonderful questions and insights into what's possible. There's so many gaps, I think, in terms of our ability to know or see the path forward. And yet we need the kind of artistic imagination that we see in your project, Seth, asking people to make visible the invisible paths and behaviors of animals. And we need the wayfinding in Guardians of Earth, so that we can look at our environment in this completely different way than maybe we've forgotten how. Because certainly in traditional ecological knowledge, that way of looking, that way of relating is still very much alive, still available. Actually, Seth, when you were speaking, it was reminding me that in the Amazon, the people have built up the Amazon as food forests for generations and generations. So as a kind of counterpoint to your observation about the Netherlands being human dominated, there's a different way, right, in terms of human relations to land, to go back to braiding sweetgrass. So it has to do with how we behave, how we treat ourselves within the environment, which I see those shifts in the work that all the organizations tonight presenting are doing. We've got a hot question coming in. Here in Yellowstone, the last wild bison, we are in need of data on migratory gateways. Can we build a shared trusted data set that can make use of both the NFT and support for restorative of species as an ecosystem level interaction of data sets that can be acceptable in game and VR? As an example, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem crosses multiple jurisdictions where the animals migrate. Really, really exciting question. It's actually at the nexus of all of this that we're talking about, right? And I love that it's asking about interaction data sets. And I'll add a little tiny piece because I can see your response is formulating for both of you. But this speaks to the need for data and cultural harmonization. In conservation space, I'm hearing this discussion of data harmonization a lot because data is so important right now and having strong data sets, but the narrative cultural harmonization with data that's being presented is really at the heart of what's being asked here. How do we line things up?
I'll be quick in my response. I think that this example is a perfect one for the protocol that I described that Sovereign Nature Initiative is creating, this decentralized protocol for environmental data. And the trusted nature of the data set that you mentioned is really the sticking point, which is one where we have to ask how, and what we have to ask where this data is coming from. We need to rely on a pipeline of data that is both reliable and has redundancies built into it. And so if we have good data, so to speak, I think one thing that's great about working in these in this Web3 world is that we can use data that crosses jurisdictions, and that we're not going directly through a government or an NGO to get the data, but are in fact crowdsourcing it to some degree, relying on citizen science. The question of the model for the data set that can be trusted is a really huge one. I don't think we can answer how we can do that, but I love the idea of tracking bison across boundaries and tracking animals across national boundaries or state boundaries in the case of the United States. I think that is actually exactly what an organization like Sovereign Nature Initiative or Guardians of the Earth, these organizations that are living in this Web3 world, are specifically designed, I think, to be outside of those conventional jurisdictions and try to think of ourselves as citizen scientists, citizen data gatherers of the world. And we need to build those pipelines together to make sure that they can be trusted and reliable and have redundancies built in, so we can trust that it's not just one camera seeing what the bison are doing, but that it's a robust system and a robust data set.
Yeah, just quickly aware of the time, but yeah, I absolutely agree. The sentiment behind the question is certainly something that we strive for, and yeah, working across boundaries, the idea that we can enable different communities celebrating their own cultural context, sharing their own stories. If there's a way that we can create through some further creative designs, bringing in some story around the bison and their migrations, and tap into the NFT approach there, that can then weave together stories that are coming in on the ground, ground truthing the stories as encountered, or as the wild bison are encountered as they move through communities, tying it together. And yeah, we'd love to explore collaborations in those spaces.
Yeah, also being aware of the time, but while we're talking about crossing borders, this kind of bioregional approach to looking at the world, I think is part of that, right? Is taking away the old nationalist lines and just seeing our world from a different perspective, from ecological perspective. It's so beautiful, right? And
that's a beautiful map.
Nature has,
it's gorgeous,
telling the story for us here. So I think that's about all we have time for. Really, really exciting discussion here. And I hope it'll continue. It's really fun to put these groups together. I'd love to see more collaborations with all of us. And I want to say thanks to our speakers, thanks to our attendees and our supporters. We really, really appreciate all the support that we get from our community of experts and donors as well. This is one in a series of forums to help educate people on coexistence, and it takes all of us to advance our mission of human-wildlife coexistence. So thanks for all that you're doing. Besides education programs and community for conservation practitioners, we provide on-the-ground resources to projects around the globe as the International Wildlife Coexistence Network. I also host a podcast called For the Wild Ones, and that's available wherever you like to listen. And please add your support with a donation at the link in the chat. And check us out online. Thanks so much for joining us, and keep in touch about what you're up to. Also look out for our next webinar. We've got more exciting ones coming up. So Thanks, everybody.